Welcome back to Cornwall and a series that is showcasing some of the best heritage, scenery, food, accommodation and activities that the southwest of England counties of Devon and Cornwall have to offer. If you're just joining me, I'm Caroline, and so far I've delighted on Devon delicacies, marvelled both in and around the grand Castle Drogo, hiked through Lydford's Gorge, taken you on a tour of the cute converted shepherd's hut, and flung myself off a range of coastal cliffs. In today's video, I'll be headed towards Cornwall's Tin Mine Coast to tour the Levant Mine and Beam Engine, wander along a small section of the southwest coastal path, along to Botallack's Crown's engine houses, and swing by the National Trust's Trengwainton Gardens. If during the video you find yourself enjoying it, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to my channel so that you can join me in my Devon and Cornwall adventures. This morning we've come along to Levant Beam Engine, which is right on the very southern coast of Cornwall, not too far from Land's End. It is a National Trust property, but because it's indoors, people can't just go in and wander around as and when they want. We needed to pre-book a tour, which I think lasts for 90 minutes. We were told that unless we needed accessible parking, which we don't, we would need to park further along the southwest coastal path, and we would need to take a walk along that southwest coastal path to get there, which at the time of booking it sounded actually really quite nice, and it started off quite nice for the first 5 or so minutes because we had to walk through Levant Tin Mine, but unfortunately the heavens then opened and it became less pleasant, so we're just trying to get to the mine, ready for the tour to start. In 1920, the Levant Mining Company was formed, and from it, tin and copper were extracted. As the miners made their way into the mine, they'd collect a handful of wet clay, mould it around their candle, and use it to stick to their hat that they collected from the holes in the wall. The candle would have been the miners' sole means of lighting whilst underground. The 181-year-old Cornish Beam Engine from Hale, just 20 miles up the road, was very unique as it was the only winding engine. It turns the up and down motion into a rotary one. It sits in the original place and still uses steam to run. The engine was used to wind the skips of ore up the shaft and empty ones back down, ready to be refilled. If it went out of action, no ore came out of the mine, meaning no money to be made. The operators had to be very skilled as the skips went down 1,700 feet and weighed between a tonne and a tonne and a half. On wet and windy days, it was the best place to be due to shelter and warmth. So long as there were miners underground, the beam engine was running. So in times when the metal was worth a lot, this could have been 24 hours a day, 6 days a week, taking only Sundays off. We learnt that in the late 1800s, many Cornish miners emigrated as they were earning around £5 per month, but could earn £120 per month in South Africa and Australia. This was at the price of their health due to the heat and dust, however. In 1919, the man engine, which carried miners to the depths of the mine, collapsed, killing 31 men. This tragedy marked the beginning of the end of what had been a very profitable mine. The deep levels, which had the rich lodes, were never worked again. What was left elsewhere in the mine was low grade, leading to much lower profits. Throw in the price of tin falling dramatically and several changes in ownership that led to investors not wanting to invest in the mine, it eventually closed in 1933. We just finished up our tour around the mine, which was absolutely fascinating, and learned so much and started to see some of the real differences between the mines down here in Cornwall in comparison to a lot of the coal mines up in the northeast, which is where I grew up. But 20-minute walk along the southwest coastal path further away from where we originally parked the car is a place called Botallack Mines. They've said that there is a National Trust person working today, so we can have a pop down and go and have a chat to him and find out a little bit about those there as well. We've arrived now at Botallack Mine, and one of the first things that we've come across are these tunnels, and there's a whole labyrinth full of them. We've learned that the ore that was mined, particularly for the tin, was not great because it was full of arsenic, and the arsenic meant that the tin became very brittle, and the more brittle the tin was, the lower the value. So they would burn the ore, and that would get rid of the arsenic, obviously improving the value of the tin. And as time went on, the miners realised that the arsenic was actually valuable, and it became a byproduct of the mining industry here. They would put the ore into a fire, and the smoke would run through these labyrinth tunnels, and because the stone and bricks on the side were quite cool, it meant that the arsenic within the smoke would then stick to the sides of the tunnels, and they would come along and then scrape it off. And they were able to, in addition to selling on the tin, also sell on the arsenic, which would be used for things such as fertiliser, paint, weed killer, and even, believe it or not, things like makeup, before they really understood the dangers of what arsenic could do. The Crown engine houses behind me were named so because of three rocks just out in the sea called the Crown Rocks. The lower of the two had an engine pump in it, and that was because the mine tunnels actually go underneath the sea, and so it was used to pump out or keep out any of the seawater from the working mines. The pump, believe it or not, had to be lowered over the edge of the cliff, which was one of many of the amazing feats that were brought about in the 19th century. The higher of the two Crown engine houses had another engine, but this one was used as a mine shaft, which lowered the miners down into the mine, but also brought the ore back up to the land surface. This particular shaft or tramway operated at 32.5 degrees, so diagonally going down underneath the sea. Not that we'd necessarily planned to come along to some gardens after having explored the Tin Cornish coast, but when we were driving there this morning, we kept on seeing signs for the National Trust's Trengwainton Gardens, and it's just before 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so with a few hours until it closes, and obviously membership that gets us in for free, our curiosity is getting the better of us, so we'll go and have a look at what this place has to offer, because I have no idea what it's like. First port of call in the gardens is the Jubilee Gardens, and this is where people from the 20th century started to travel the world and collected plants and seeds and brought them back to the UK and planted them here. And I guess with Cornwall's slightly warmer climate, certainly in comparison say to where we were last summer in Scotland, I guess the plants are able to cope a little bit better here, particularly when they've come from these warmer overseas far-flung places. So far from what I've seen, it's been a really nice blend of plants from all over the world, but then you come into sections such as this one and it's got the typical things that you'd expect to see in an English garden. So we've got a walled orchard. We've also, on the other side of the wall, got a walled kitchen garden, and obviously the orchard's growing apples, which is very typical for British gardens. But dotted throughout, there's a few beehives, and they've also got an old Victorian bee house. So it's made out of brick instead of like the normal wood, I suppose. And there's lots and lots of different holes, and we were reading the sign that was explaining that if a bee was to go into the wrong one, obviously because it's going into the wrong bee colony, it would result in the bee's death, because naturally it's an invader into another bee's colony. But by the looks of things at the moment, they've only got the one beehive within there, so I don't think it's too problematic at the moment. But maybe back in history when it was first built, the amount of holes that we can see, I'm guessing that they had lots of different ones. Since we arrived in Cornwall a couple of days ago, we've seen an awful lot of hydrangeas, particularly in people's front gardens. And the one thing that's really stood out to me is the fact that the majority of them are blue. We do have hydrangeas in both our front and back garden at home. We didn't plant them, the person who owned the property previous to us had done, but they are all pink. And what I've learned is that at home our soil must be very alkaline-y, because when it's got alkaline present, the hydrangeas are pink, and then the ones that you can see behind me, they are sat in quite acidity soil, I guess, and that's then what makes them blue. So I guess just naturally the soil around Cornwall area in comparison to South London is acidic, makes it blue. But there are also dotted throughout these gardens some white ones as well, which I believe is where you've got like a balance between the two. And the one thing that I have seen are purple ones, but I don't know what makes them purple. As always, if you do know and you can let me know, please let me know in the comment section below. Whilst exploring these gardens, I'm learning that it was back in the 1920s when there was quite a big craze for people trying to hunt and find the newest and most exotic of plants, and that was something that really pushed for Trengwainton Gardens to get as many overseas and exotic plants as what they managed. Quite a few of the plants that are in here were the first of its kind to be grown within the British Isles, and unlike what I first thought when we turned up, there weren't any plants that were brought over. It was just seeds that were put onto slow boats, and they came over from, again, what back in the 1920s was seen as like really exotic and far-flung places like the Far East. Through the gardens eventually winds up to a dead end, but that dead end is this terrace up here, which the staff members all say do try and get up to. It is unfortunately a little bit of a cloudy and overcast day, but behind me is Mounts Bay. I'm assuming it's called that because it has St Michael's Mount in there, but I think it's slightly hidden by the trees. And if you are able to work out the landmass on the other side of the bay, that's where Lizard Point is, and that's definitely high up on my list of places that I want to go and visit at some point whilst we're down here on this trip. This is yet another National Trust property that I've come to where the house that you can see behind me isn't actually owned by the National Trust, it's privately owned. But for me personally, I do really love the gardens, and I'd far rather that it was that way around rather than they own the house and they don't own the gardens. So I'm more than happy just seeing all of the plants in this place. Speaking of the plants, so many different species of things in here. The variety has been wonderful, and in comparison to Castle Drogo that we went to the other day, I was worried a little bit that we might have seen a lot of the same kinds of things, but this place is just completely different. It's been wonderful. And just as we're about to get to the exit of this place, we found out that some of the challenges that the National Trust are now facing is obviously with the changing global temperatures, global warming, and also new pests and diseases. They're working really hard to try and protect the gene pool of these plants and trees so that future generations can enjoy them the way in which we can today. We've just exited through the gift shop, and now thinking about my final thoughts on this place. As members, naturally we've been able to get in for free, but adults do cost £9.50. I'm not too sure if it's maybe because we did this very much as a whistle-stop tour, but I'm not too sure if I'd have been overly happy paying the £9.50 to get in, because they don't seem too big in comparison to some other gardens that we've visited. But obviously if you are a member and you're going to get in for free, and it's just a case of giving up some time to come and visit, I 100% would recommend a visit. These gardens are just so different to any of the ones that we've visited in the southeast of England, and I suppose the odd one or two that we've dabbled in up in Wales as well. So it has been very, very enjoyable. And I think we're quite cream-cracking now because it's been a very long day. So we're going to head back to our Airbnb accommodation, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.